I'm so glad to have my dear friend and colleague, Karmit Bulman, on Tuesday Tips. Karmit, welcome to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers.
Thank you, Dana. I'm happy to be here.
And I set this up specifically to kind of do a quick turnaround on these Tuesday Tips because you have a very important report on achieving racial equity in volunteerism that just came out, and what are kind of some of the few major points that people can do around that just to get those conversations started.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. MAVA feels it's really important to listen to the voices of people from Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. So we held listening sessions last year to talk about race equity, excuse me, in volunteerism. And we listened, we learned, we added it to all of the research that we have been doing. And we learned that there are several things you can do as an individual, things that can be done in a volunteer program at the programmatic level, and then at the organizational level. So obviously, it's always easiest to start at the individual level. So we talk about the importance of prioritizing your own equity education. So doing professional development and personal development around race equity and spending time reading, talking, book groups, discussion groups, podcasts, movies, understand the depth of the race equity problem that we have, not only in this country, across the world. You can focus on your own country if you want to, but at the individual level, start educating yourself. Beyond anti-racism in general work, begin looking at race equity in volunteerism. So reach out to other volunteer engagement colleagues who are looking at race equity in volunteerism. And if you need some connections, MAVA's got them for you. And have conversations, influence other people, influence organizations that you are involved with. Make sure that you are doing programming with an equity lens. So that's at the individual level. At the volunteer program level, listen to the voices of our Black, Indigenous, people of color friends. So listening sessions with your volunteers from communities of color. How about potential volunteers within your community? Listen, learn. Why are people not coming to volunteer at your organization? Why are people coming to volunteer at your organization? Are there policies and systems that are in place at your organization that are setting up barriers for BIPOC communities to volunteer? Have you done education for the volunteers and staff at your organization about race equity topics? Have you built anti-racism into your volunteer orientation, for example? Have you looked at your volunteer handbook, job descriptions, recruitment policies and practices with an equity lens and make sure that there aren't barriers? And given how many volunteer systems have been set up, there probably are barriers. We ask the question when we set up volunteer systems and we talk about best practices, we say best practices for whom? Were they best practices for us as white professionals who set up these systems? Did we listen to and ask communities of color to help us build the systems so it's best for everyone? And then finally, at the organizational level, equitable hiring practices are incredibly important. We know that we are not going to get a cadre of volunteers of color if we have an all-white staff. We also need to make sure that leadership includes communities of color. I have heard that 30% of leadership and staff need to be from communities of color at a minimum, especially if you're serving communities of color. So organizationally, there's a lot of work to do in terms of promoting race equity. And then finally, An inclusive organizational culture is essential. Make equity, diversity, and inclusion education a primary duty of all staff, a priority for your organization, and to encourage staff to speak up when encountering bias or racially charged activity in your organization. So, again, individual, volunteer program, organization, there's much to do.
There is so much to do, and thank you, Karmit. This is just the Tuesday tips always scratch the surface and kind of spark these deeper conversations, and this is a deeply important and extremely relevant topic I'm so delighted to see this research come out. I know you and the rest of your MAVA team have been working on this for a long time, and I'm encouraging everyone to stay tuned for when our full Priceless Advice conversation that really digs deep into this report and some other programs and some offerings that MAVA has around educating oneself and one's organization and making those deep systemic changes to connect in a meaningful and honest way with the community. So thank you, Karmit, so much for these Tuesday tips.
You're welcome.